Welcome to Modern Management of the Older Adult, brought to you by the Institute of Clinical Excellence.
Hey everybody, welcome to the MMOA podcast. We are live and my name is Shelby Blankenship, and today we're going to be talking about the elder care law. So this is a topic that not many people are super familiar with. So I just kind of wanted to go through it. I've personally experienced some of the things that we are going to be talking about, but also these are really nice little tips and tricks just to help broaden of how you can help people in more ways than just PT, but kind of give them resources on where to find these locally, depending on where you're practicing. So what is elder care law? Why do we even care? So elder care law is a very specific specialty practice when it deals with the law, just like geriatrics is for physical therapy. Very similar thing. The biggest thing is they're kind of focused on managing a lot of the financials, medical situations that tend to come as we get older, or as we get towards more like that end of life, and help creating best practices or easing the burden for not only the client, but also their families so that wishes are understood. There are metrics and practices put in place to help keep them safe or keep their financials or medical situation in a safe place, especially if there are any hurdles that they're having to navigate throughout. So, a couple of things that I wanted to mention. This is definitely something that we all should be aware of and something that we should all kind of probably utilize as we get older. But the situations that I'm thinking of specifically are people who might have the diagnosis of dementia or have some mental health issues that might limit them a little bit more on creating making sound decisions, especially as they get more into those care or into their life, and might struggle a little bit more on making decisions that actually make sense, especially from a financial standpoint. I've seen situations where somebody might have some dementia, but they love to spend money and they can just blow their money away. So these are people who can really help set safeguards for those people, but also just for normal individuals that they're trying to protect their estate, create trust, allow some more financial flexibility, and really understand kind of where they're at as they get older. So the two big ones that we kind of mentioned are financials and medical. So with financials, some things we want to think about is insurance. So, whether the VA, Medicaid, Medicare, what options they have for Medicare, and what financially makes sense for their situation. We also might want to be looking at trusts or estates for how they can manage their financials to a point where, say, maybe they made a really good amount of money and then, an accident happened. Maybe they had a car accident, maybe they had a stroke, and now they're unable to work for whatever reason. These people can really be helpful in setting up good strongholds to make sure that they keep that money safe, not only for themselves, especially if maybe a TBI is on board and they're not able to make those decisions, but also to make sure it limits the family having to intervene so that there isn't that weird, awkward situation or hurt feelings between family members because they're not spending it correctly. Those safeguards are already put in place. As far as the medical side, there's care planning. So if somebody already has a diagnosis that, maybe it's Parkinson's or something where it's going to be this gradual process, their wishes can be made about what they're willing to do and what they're not willing to do. And those, of course, can always change. But I think it'll allow somebody who is able to kind of state those on the front end if they're able. That will help the family, that will help um, just make the decisions a lot easier rather than having to decide in real time, when emotions are high and those kinds of things can get really messy. Especially when it comes to like end of life. I know this can get really, really tricky. When I worked in the hospital for a long time, the amount of DNRs versus not DNRs. And if you're unfamiliar what a DNR is, it's a do not resuscitate. So people can decide on the front end whether they're like, hey, nope, I don't want AED, I don't want CPR. If it's my time to go, I'm good to go. That also is good information for us as providers to know. So if something were to happen during session, you know immediately whether you need to go get AED, start CPR. Obviously, you're always trumped to do CPR and do all the things. But if you have that DNR form in hand and know for sure that that applies to that patient, that can also help with that stress level and understand what the end of life care is. There are also ways where they especially when the elder care law, that you can actually hire somebody where they're almost that social worker where they go between the healthcare providers and the family members so that they can help create a plan that makes the most sense for that family member, especially when it's to things like housing. If somebody might have like Down syndrome or some type of diagnosis where like there's going to be this long caregiving process on board. Those kinds of things can be really helpful to make sure that they're getting the best care possible, but also like their ADLs, their housing, their caregiving needs are being met. And sometimes that's not the family member, or sometimes there is no family member. So being able to have those resources is really, really helpful, and ultimately just optimizing people's quality of life for what they want. Because I think that's one thing that it's easy for us to lose focus on, right? Like we always are like, oh, we want everybody to be super independent and doing all the deadlift things and doing all the things. And sometimes, just being able to give resources out to families or caregivers of like, hey, here's a really great elder care law group. I highly recommend you chat with them when a new diagnosis has come up and they're super concerned about like, how is dad going to be able to take care of mom because mom recently had a stroke and dad has Alzheimer's. And those kinds of situations can be really hard to navigate if you're just trying to do it yourself rather than having a whole group where that's their dedication and they can really help wrap your head around like what are the next steps. That can provide such a huge life-giving just stress reliever, I guess. And then a couple other things I wanted to mention. There are two types of ways where a family member can be involved more so in like the financial or medical, and sometimes both, decision making. So there is the power of attorney, which I think a lot of people are pretty familiar with. They can be for financial, it could be for medical, but it is a voluntary basis. So the client or the principal person that it's about decides who that person is. I know if anybody has ever worked in a hospital, you've seen where this can get super, super sticky and hairy, where people don't like who the POA is, or they've had to change it multiple times, and it can get pretty difficult, especially if end of life care wishes are either not being recognized or are unknown, and that POA has had to take on the burden of deciding those things. And one family member is wanting mom to be on the vent forever and another one's not, and how those can get a little sticky. But the biggest thing is with a POA is that person has been voluntarily or the principal person has voluntarily decided who that person is. Their other route is when it's a conservatorship. So I know we've probably heard of conservatorships when it comes to Britney Spears and a couple other celebrities. But when it comes to a conservatorship, This one is assigned by the court. So the court has decided that that adult is incapacitated to whatever level that they cannot make medical and or financial decisions. So they are the ones who are sometimes it is a family member, sometimes it is a legal representative, somebody who's not even related to that principal or client. And this is the type of person where it's involuntary from the client's perspective, but they, for whatever reason, are incapacitated, whether it's mental health issues, Alzheimer's, dementia, maybe they have autism where they're nonverbal and are unable to, make their communication needs met. So somebody's having to step in to make sure that their needs are being met. And there's paperwork for both of those. So especially if you're having to have some more honestly, on intake, if you can have that, like if somebody has a POA or conservatorship and get that paperwork on the front end, it kind of relieves a lot of headache if there are things that pop up, especially when it comes to a diagnosis and their trajectory, and you're having to communicate needs that they're going to have for whether it comes to transfers or ADLs or changing up their living situation based on safety or any of those kinds of things. Having that relationship and already knowing who your point person is, as well as the client, so you can have those discussions without there being that kind of like awkward stall, so to speak, of not knowing who's really in charge. Because that it can be very difficult when maybe you're seeing your client on a good day and didn't even know that there were these other attributes in the background that you needed to communicate with or have that relationship to ensure the best overall just outcome for your client. So elder care law, super, super helpful. I highly recommend finding one in your area and establishing a relationship with those people, even if you're not always necessarily sending referrals, but at least educating yourself on is their full capacity of things that they can do for your clients, especially because we're always going to have those weird, sticky situations when it comes to the geriatric world. You see it all the time, whether it's with spouses, whether it's with family members or caregivers, to ensure that hey, like either one, something's not sitting right, and I think they would benefit from having that kind of third party to represent them and kind of give them more opportunity to be really successful as they age, whether it comes to financials, medical, etc., or just giving that caregiver a little bit of like just some air to breathe because somebody else is taking on the burden of figuring out all these things when it comes to insurance and financials. I think just having those things in your back pocket can be super, super helpful for our patient population and just allows a little bit more holistic approach to ensure that if there's areas that they could use that we can kind of point them in that direction because we're just with them so often. And sometimes when it comes to the primary care physicians and the PAs, they have a lot of things that they're trying to manage with medications and vitals and doing all the things. And sometimes things like this can get easily missed because they're not reading the situation when it comes to what's the relationship really between, a spouse and what is the relationship with the caregiver and all those different types of things. Like this could be really, really nice and helpful to have as a resource for them. So that's kind of just a recap on some elder care law. I mean, this is definitely a very, very small little wave of what you can provide education-wise for your patients. There's a multitude of things, and it's really worth digging in to your local elder care law and seeing who is the best of the best in your area and making sure that they get the help that they need. as far as classes that come for MMOA, March 13th, we are starting a new cohort for the L1. May 16th is our next L2 class. So if you're needing that to end up getting your CERT MMOA, make sure to sign up for that. And then we have 2 upcoming live courses. March 16th is going to be live at Newton, Kansas. And then March 23rd will be live in Madison, Wisconsin. I hope that was helpful for y'all. Please leave comments if you have elder care law in your area that you really love so that we can make sure to give them a shout out. Y'all have a great rest of your
Thank you for listening to the MMOA podcast. If you found this helpful, please share with someone that could benefit. And if you're looking for more practical content to help you better serve older adults, head over to www.mmoa.online, where you can learn more about our free resources, our community, continuing education courses, and our certification. Once again, that's www.mmoa.online. Thanks for listening.